Gayatri Mahamantra, back straight, contemplative mood, both hands on the laps. Om Bhurbhuvah Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yonah Prachodayat. Today we talk about an exalted being, well prepared from several past lives for a final culmination to touch the zenith of moksha, final liberation. Born in a royal family in the district Satara, state Maharashtra, at a very tender age of 7 years, merely 7 years, he moves out of the house and enters into a religious shrine by the name Battis Shirala in a Sangli district of Maharashtra, which happens to be a mutt of Nath Sampradaya. And there he assimilates himself into the several monks residing in the mutt. Along with the Mahant means the one who was the senior monk over there, along with them he departs for a holy journey to Himalayas, the most arduous one. On barefoot they traverse throughout this nation to touch Himalayas, and then at Himalayas he avails the opportunity to move through, rather I can use the word, he embroidered Himalayas. He went through, crisscrossed from one range to the another range, all barefoot. The deeper Himalayas even today, if one wants to traverse, shall be mostly have to be done barefoot itself. How difficult it is, I think the people who are into mountaineering can respond to this better than this humble teacher. Finally, having traversed Himalayas all through, he planned to settle in Badrinath. And at Badrinath, he found a small cave which he settled for himself as his abode for his further penance. Now, placed into the cave, he is about to initiate upon his further journey of sadhana, that there comes down from the mountain a sage clad in saffron. He comes in his cave. He is carrying a kamandal. Kamandal is the kind of a pot, a utensil that sannyasis, the monks, carry in India. These days it's made out of metal, but there was a time when it was by creating a hollow space into a large pumpkin, they could create a sort of a utensil. He came with a kamandal, the utensil is known as kamandal, and gave a splash of a water, sprinkled water on the face of the young sadhu, that is Gagan Giriji Maharaj. After giving a splash of a water on his face, he said, "Sannyasi, now the time has come for you in this life to finally transcend towards liberation. You shall achieve your salvation this life." And he offered him something to eat in the form of few herbs of Himalayas that appeared to be, as it is mentioned, appeared to be resembling coriander leaves. After that, he gave him a direction that now go southward into the country and spread the message of Dharma, do your sadhana and help people to evolve. Having said that, the great sage who had appeared in his cave left. After having the message of that great exalted being, some celestial being, Gagangiriji Maharaj, now walks barefoot downward. But the journey was not that easy those days. There was no road, no passages. One had to traverse through the raw terrain of the mountains, covering few miles each day. So that gave him another opportunity to stay wherever he could find some water in the form of either a tal, a pond, spend few days, perform his sadhana, and then move down further downward. It probably took him a long period of time to finally touch Rishikesh, where from the plains start. Thereafter, he traveled downward, and traveling downward, he came to a place at Rajapur, where he underwent a special sadhana of Kaya Kalp. Kaya Kalp means rejuvenation shall be too short of a word to explain the essence of Kaya Kalp. You can understand it as sort of a transformation or a transmutation. Both words can approximate the meaning of Kaya Kalp. The mind, the intellect, the ego, and this physical dimension, this mortal body, they all undergo a total change, That is called as Kaya, means the body, and Kalp also means a passage of time under which there is a strict adherence to some discipline. So he underwent a Kaya Kalp for about 3 years at Rajapur between 1945 to 1948. He was at Bhopal, lying down beside a huge water tank that was noticed by another royal person who was then the Raja of Kolhapur, the king of Kolhapur. They communicated and found that both were from Maharashtra, both the dialect was the same between them, Marathi, and then he impressed upon this young sadhu to accompany him to Kolhapur. Near Kolhapur, probably, there happens to be a forest by the name Dajipur, where the king wanted to go for a spree of hunting, which was very common with the kings at that time. But the Maharaj chose to stay in the jungle and did not return. And then he stayed into the forest for the next 8 years, performing his strict sadhana, remaining in absolute seclusion. But even then, several members of the royal family, not only from Kolhapur, from other states, princely states as well, continued visiting him in the forest to seek his blessings. The forest became his abode in the terms that he would choose a large tree which had a cavity to hold him. He could get into that cavity, considering it as a small cave, and stay there in order to consider it as sort of an abode. And then not only that he would stay into that small cavity of the tree, within the tree, but also survive throughout on the forest, not seeking anything from the world outside. Although that the people from princely states were visiting him, from royal families used to visit him very frequently. Any amount of gifts would have been something just with the blink of an eye. But no, what he was wearing, what he was using as a wrap, what he was using as a spread, what he was using to eat, everything came from the forest. He himself would take the help of his own hands, take the use of bark, leaves, threads falling from the grown trees, old trees, and then try to make them in a manner that they become his wrap, his clothes, etc., or his spread. Everything was from the trees, and especially 3 varieties of trees helped him a lot to undergo this kind of a strict adherence to the penance. And they were like Apta, the Hindi names are known to me, Apta, Palas and Kumbha. These trees helped him to sustain himself for prolonged period of times in absolute solitude, with a total connect and a disconnect from the world outside. Connect with the reason that people visited him into that deep dense forest, but disconnect, he was sovereign. The right word be, he was sovereign. He was not dependent upon anyone. He was absolutely self-reliant. He would spread himself upon the rock to lie down flat, or bask under the sun for long periods of time, or meditate underwater for a long period of time. This is something which is very common with the exalted yogis. For common people, these things are almost, not exactly, impossible to even imagine about. But for yogis, they are in a different world. They have evolved themselves to be the beings of a different world, that for them these things become a normal way of life. And that's what happened with him as well. Many exalted beings visited him because he left his physical abode, this mortal plane, in 20th century in 2008. So there were many contemporary people who were highly successful in several walks of life in the world outside used to continue visiting him, because he too was roaming around from one forest to another, one place to another, to undergo his penance, guide people, bless people, help them, enable them meditate, and so on. So much so that it has been mentioned that a great industrialist of India, Dhirubhai Ambani, visited him to seek his blessings, and then the great mighty one Bala Saheb Thackeray also visited him and was blessed by Maharaj. And Bala Saheb Thackeray used to wear a Rudraksh mala on his wrist. It is mentioned that that was a blessing given by Maharaj Shri to Bala Saheb. In 2008, at 3:30 a.m. in the morning, that's before Brahm Muhurat, I can say, starts, or rather the Brahm Muhurat itself, he left his mortal plane, having guided thousands and thousands of people. He left in his ashram at Khopoli in Maharashtra. Now the most important thing is mentioning about, for the seekers especially, the seekers who meditate, who are sincere, who are serious enough to now understand and acknowledge that meditation and the way of the spiritual pursuit shall only be able to evolve them for their further journey onwards and not on this planet. For them, the light of his words, the wisdom of his words has to be translated into one's life. This is for the seekers like me and you. He said specially about dharana and dhyan. Dharana is about the contemplation, dharana and pratyahar. Pratyahar is the fifth milestone under the Ashtanga Yoga of Patanjali, Yam Niyam Asana Pratyahar, and dharana happens to be the sixth. So he said dharana cannot, that the contemplation cannot be stationary. You cannot stay on any thought or any contemplation unless you have a purified mind. Your mind shall keep on jumping like a frog, like a monkey, from this bark to another, unless it is purified. And you must purify. And for that you need to work upon pratyahar. Pratyahar means withdrawal. Rolling back your awareness from all places where it is assigned at the moment. Wherever it is commissioned outside, you roll back within yourself. You become interiorized in absolute terms. You withdraw awareness from the seekings of the sensorial drivers. You take everything from them, the total charge comes to you, and your entire awareness consolidates within your head. That's pratyahar, becoming absolutely inward. Now for that, you need to work a lot. You have to be the master of each and every cause that is going to deflect you from your pursuit. Because each and every incoming thought, imagination, desire, cause of concern, a memory, a recall of the past day could deflect your mind, could steer it, hijack it for a while and leave you barefoot, thump you on the ground after having cherishing its own gratification. So why allow the thought, imagination, desires and these wandering, unmindful chartings to come and usurp your creative resource? Why allow them? Why not to take the charge and do not deflect, do not yield before them? That can only happen when you master and you act to take charge of your awareness, and you don't react to all cause and concern that appear before you to deflect you. Now this word is worth billions of dollars. Can you equate in terms of money? No. I'm just using it as a metaphor, nothing more than that. Their words are beyond any denomination, any price. You cannot evaluate them. They are timeless and nothing can buy them. Nothing can approximate even the wealth which they really equate up to. So he said, don't react, but act. Do not react. React to what? Any wandering concern that wants to hijack your awareness, especially during the moments of your meditation or your japa. You are sitting within for the meditation, you want to go inwards, you have done all that could withdraw your senses by focusing upon your breath, the cycle of breath, etc., etc., and then again a streak of a thought comes, something from nowhere about something that is associated with you, and then the hijacks you. You recall, you reenact situations, whatever you do. So now, but you are not with yourself. You have now been hijacked by that incoming intruder. It's there that you don't have to react. React means to be hijacked. They say hi, you say hi. That's a reaction. Don't react. Act. Grab them on the neck and deflect it. Deflect it. You don't get deflected, but you deflect it. How you deflect it? By taking a charge, by shrugging your shoulders and making a gesture like this, by saying, no, I'm not getting into this. However foolish it may appear, but this is the tactic of the wise ones, to tactfully deflect the incoming intruder that wants to infringe into your spiritual pursuit. If you are able to do it regularly, gradually you will find the grip of the incoming intruders in any form to hijack your awareness, especially during the moments of your meditation and japa, shall cease to exercise much control upon you, and then you shall start becoming master. He also said that by exercising your will, by exercising your resolute, indomitable will, you can be master of your situations and not a victim of them. These are purely his words. And he also said that if you take the charge of your pratyahar, you don't know how much is the quantum of the energies that you shall be able to conserve within yourself. Then he went on to say something about the exalted ones, the Navanath. He said, those beings, they don't depend upon solid food. They have evolved to such an estate that they merely open their eyes for a few seconds or take 2 breaths, and they are done for a long period of time. The requisite energy is then there within them. They don't need much of stock afterwards, and their bodies have become so light, as heavy as a feather of a bird. Now you can well understand. They are the true repositories of ancient Indian wisdom, and at the same time those exalted ones, those celestial ones, they keep guiding the evolving souls through various manners. He insisted upon the sadhaks to purify their body, because a purified body is a highly impactful instrument to further into one's spiritual pursuit. He said a yogi remains at 3 levels of awareness at any given point of time. He is inward, absolutely aware about all ongoings within himself. He knows everything going on is in intellect, mind, ego, body. Even the smallest activity is known to him. He knows everything about himself. Whereas the common world, we know about the world, but we are oblivious about our own self. We are ignorant about our own self. On the contrary, a yogi knows himself through and through. Then he said, the second level of the awareness knows about the world outside, what is happening. And the third aspect of their awareness is in communion with the divine world of absolute harmony, which is generally locked to the common people. It's there where the immensity and infinity lies. He said, a yogi in the state of this kind of a triple consciousness can easily guide, solve, heal many people, and that's what he was well able to do. Probably he lived for more than 100 years and finally departed in 2008 at his ashram in Khopoli, another place in Maharashtra, at 3:30 a.m. in the morning. He departed from this mortal plane, but they go nowhere. They stay because they become more pervasive, and they become pervasive into the surrounds. A mere recall by a sincere seeking of a seeker shall force them, yes, sincere recall of a pure intent will force them to come, navigate, guide, inspire the seeker. Having said this, I convey my pranams to those first who had an opportunity to see him in person, because he was in these recent times, so there may be many people, large number, who have met him and who are still there. So my first pranam goes to them, that they were really virtuous enough. Indeed, their luck, their fortune of several lives accumulated and rendered them an opportunity to see such an exalted being in physical form. And then the second, I, from the depth of my existence, offer myself and my pranams before the lotus feet of this great exalted being. Me, under the blessing of my Brahm Rishi, I say pranams to you, Maharashi, pranam. ओम ही सत्य है, ओम ही सत्य है, ओम ही सत्य है.